oils, whatever it might be, actually does help reset your brain. So my feelings about climate change are really rooted in a great love of nature that, you know, my mother really instilled in me. I mean, just lying on the ground looking at a tree, what a miracle it is. And to know that as a human being, we did not do that. We did not create that. We did not create the oceans and the rivers and the mountains and the forests. We inherited it. And with that inheritance, as with any inheritance, should come a sense of responsibility. And so I care deeply about climate because I see the impacts that it's having, just the extraordinary damage it is doing, and what is now expected to be increasing temperatures that will flood islands, cause wildfires, increase the severity of storms, subject our bodies to extreme heat, because we have not cared for our planet. And, you know, sometimes when I say things like this, I see, you know, political eyes or business eyes kind of glaze over, like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, if we don't take care of our world today, it will cost us more.
Parakeet AI is an AI online call assistant that gives you the answer to every question on your online call.
It will cost us more political conflict. That is not good for business, and it's not good for politics. So I come from a very personal perspective as to why I believe we have to keep trying, despite the naysayers, despite the cynics. We have to keep trying with all of our hearts and minds to really respect and cherish this planet that has given us everything. And we have done some really good things with it, but we have caused some great damage. So now we have to try our hardest to make amends.
I couldn't agree with you more. I did want to ask you the final question, and take your time on this. What is your advice for young Global South climate leaders?
Do not give in to the naysayers and the cynics. Do not doubt that you are engaged in historic, important work. Of course, you have to understand the politics. You have to understand the markets and the businesses. That is part of being an effective advocate. You have to know how hard you can push, what compromises you can take to try to go farther and get more done because you have built on it and you're ready to go from there. So I think the voices of young people in the Global South have to get much louder and much more insistent. And you also have to come up with creative solutions. And then you have to keep knocking on doors till other people listen to you. You know, I remember when I went to the COP conference in Dubai, I met with a group of young activists from the Global South. They had extraordinary ideas, but they couldn't get anybody to listen to them. They didn't bring their bankers with them. They didn't have bankers. They didn't know people on boards of directors of companies, but they were rooted in solving the problems they saw in their communities. So we have to be more open and understanding that ideas are going to come from everywhere, and they're going to be good ideas. Most of the global climate financing doesn't go to people like that. And very, very little of it goes to women who are activists and environmental innovators. So let's open our minds, and if you're a young climate activist, keep knocking on those doors, keep making your arguments, keep showing up, come to conferences like this, and keep working together. And, you know, as I said, the Clinton Global Initiative, we will help you. We will help introduce you to people. We will try to find networks that you can be part of. Come to our meeting in September, because this needs to be everybody working together, not one group, not one country, everybody working together. So that's my plea and really my gratitude, because you've got to pick up this baton that we have dropped, and you have to run to the finish line and take the rest of us with you.
Thank you.
I cannot wait for the political change that I know will come to the United States, because that's a few years off. We have to build
This is how simple it is to create your first AI-powered algo trading robot. First, you need to select the instrument.
Dear Narendra Modi, honorable ministers, members of parliaments.
It is a new market. We have to be creative about how we bring the public and private and philanthropic sectors together. So I could not be more enthusiastic, I think you could tell, about being here with all of you and representing the Clinton Global Initiative, because we look for partners who want to do hard things and make a difference. And then when we see results, let's scale them. So you bringing everyone together for this first inaugural climate session here in Mumbai is, I am confident, the beginning of the change that needs to happen.
Thank you for saying that. I do think you've hit on something that, interestingly enough, I was going to come to next. You've talked about the need for systems change. At the ICC, we work with funders to help them move their giving towards impactful climate solutions. But something that I've been personally reflecting on a lot of late, especially given the fact that we are currently underway the largest intergenerational transfer of wealth from one generation to the next globally. Yeah. Trillions of dollars are going to move. It is one of the most fundamental economic justice issues of our time. And it is built on those extractive systems that right now are accelerating the climate crisis. Are we simply destroying the planet and asking for those who've benefited most from it to pay and to fix it? Do we need to look at the role of philanthropy, not just as, a charity or, sort of supporting climate change as yet another cause? Or does philanthropy really need to now address a systems challenge, which is to fundamentally redistribute the source of power, wealth, accountability to those who need it the most?
I have always thought that philanthropy needs to do two things at once. It needs to help alleviate the kind of suffering, misery, disease, hunger that we can all see. We see it, we know it, and if we have a heart, we want to help. And that's exactly what has driven so much philanthropy. However, that is not enough. There's that old saying, if you want to feed a hungry person, give them a fish. If you want to end hunger, teach them to fish. We've got to address the structural, systemic problems that have created the kinds of issues that you all are concerned about, or you would not be here. And so to that extent, it does seem that philanthropy can do several things. I mentioned this climate resilience fund that we are establishing that began as a commitment through the Clinton Global Initiative. Philanthropy is providing the first dollars. It is providing the organizational, administrative efforts to set this fund up, to be sponsoring the efforts to reach out to other funders so that we can get it up and going, and then we can look at making systemic changes. And the systemic changes, when we think about climate change, just very roughly, are certainly in adaptation and mitigation. We have a lot of philanthropy in the United States, as well as here in India, that is a result of the huge amounts of money that have been made from fossil fuels and from the causation of climate change over 100+ years. And of course, most of that is a result of the development in the North, in countries like the United States, the UK, and elsewhere. But certainly it's fair to say that more developed countries in the South, China, India, and others, are making contributions because we haven't made a full-scale enough transition into clean, renewable energy to replace polluting fossil fuels. And when I talk about fossil fuels, I'm not just talking about climate change. I'm talking about the pollution that fills the air in Delhi or Beijing. I'm talking about the clear evidence that pollution is impacting our health, and not just among poor people, among all of us. The particulates and what we breathe in is affecting our health, and particularly the health of our children. So that's why when I talk about climate, I always talk about climate and health, because it's not just an energy issue, it is also a health issue. So when we think about this big intergenerational transfer of wealth, I think that the older generation needs to join with the younger generation in doing whatever we can to interrupt this cycle of climate change and health impacts. And so from that perspective, we do need governments to address the systemic and structural issues, but we also need businesses and corporations to think that way as well. Just because the President of the United States does not want corporations to care about climate change doesn't mean you shouldn't care about climate change. Frankly, that's a political view of a dinosaur. It is just so out of touch with everything that we know, how we are living, what we are breathing, what we are seeing. We can't be told, don't pay attention to what has happened for political reasons. We have to say, no, we see it, and we're going to respond to it. So the systemic changes in both mitigation and adaptation must continue, despite some of the pushback coming from my country in particular. But I want to go further than that. I think businesses, individuals, communities, we all have a role to play, and we all have agency. We can do things. We can make a difference. And I remember being in India when I was Secretary of State for official business, of course, with the government, but also I met with businesses and groups of women and activists who were trying to provide cleaner cooking. Now think about that. Clean cooking. Why? Because so much of what is burned for cooking in the world still today is polluting. And the fourth leading cause of death in the world is respiratory illnesses. And there's a huge percentage of those that come to women and children because they are cooking food over polluting fires. And so we launched a big effort to change the way, to create a market for clean cooking utensils. Now that's a small thing, but it could have a big impact. So there is something for all of us to think about doing. And of course, I want to see governments do a much better job of fulfilling their responsibility and not turning the clock back and not pretending that climate change is not real. But I want to see businesses and philanthropies and individuals and communities coming up with their own ideas. And that's why, you know, at the Clean Global Initiative, we partner with all these different groups. We partner with governments, and we partner with businesses, and we partner with philanthropies and community organizations, because I honestly believe now is the time for us to get creative, focused, and determined to address climate change in all the ways that each of us can.
Thank you for that very rousing call to action for collaboration and integrated approaches. Speaking of transformations, we're undergoing two major disruptions right now at the same time. The planet is changing, and the nature of work itself is also changing. And of course, I'm speaking to the climate transition as well as the AI revolution that is underway. We have a massive AI summit going on right now in Delhi, as you know. And look, AI can be an incredible tool to address the climate challenge. I mean, it can really optimize renewable grids. AI can help us with hyper-local projections around flooding, strengthen agricultural resilience. But this technology is also consuming vast amounts of power, water, infrastructure, not to mention the fact that climate and AI together are fundamentally going to reshape labor markets and migration at a scale we've never seen before. So are we leveraging the present at the cost of the future?
We don't know yet. I'm very pleased that you're doing two things today that are about the future. This conference about climate right here in Mumbai, the conference about AI in Delhi. But we can't just talk about this. We've got to do much more to understand more deeply the interconnectivity between AI and climate, and really AI and everything. as of now, it appears, other than, having a conversation or asking a question to whatever, Chat GPT, Claude, Gemini, whoever you're talking to, the biggest advance has been in health. But we've seen some really exciting ways that AI can not just having aggregated information, but analyze it and provide in real time advice to physicians and other health practitioners. I'm very excited about that. But I think we would be naive not to recognize the potential threats that AI and its development is causing. I mean, we even hear from the people who run these big companies, they don't have any idea what is going to happen. They don't know how these technical advances are going to impact humanity. So if the people creating them don't know, then we have an obligation to say, let's slow down and figure out how we're going to manage this. And you mentioned the energy requirement for AI and the water requirement for running the big data server complexes. How is that going to affect the rest of us? How is that going to affect the energy supply, the cost of energy? How's it going to affect the clean water supply? Because for reasons that I don't pretend to understand, they claim they can't use recycled water. They have to use fresh water. Well, a lot of places in the world don't have an adequate supply of fresh water. So what does all that mean in terms of how we manage reaction to AI? But then the other issue that you alluded to, the labor market issue. What will we do with the millions of people who are going to be displaced because of AI? How will they be able to support themselves? How will society understand and relate to them? What obligation do we have to people who, through no fault of their own, see their jobs totally disappear? How do we get ahead of that problem? Because it's going to happen to us. And then with respect to the climate, in addition to the energy and the water issues, are we going to make sure that whatever information is available is, number one, accurate, so we can rely on it, whatever the data is, but number two, do we have the existing infrastructure to respond? Can our grids handle it? I'm speaking for the United States. I don't think our grids can handle whatever the new load is and whatever the new predictions are. So how do we plan for all of this to make it more of a positive than a negative, literally across the world? So I think that the AI conversations that are happening are important, but governments need to be ready to demand answers. The people running these companies are the richest people in the world. These companies are extremely powerful. They want to shape the future. They want to shape the politics of the future in every country in the world, but especially powerful leading countries like India. They want to be the determiners of how you respond to them instead of people through their elected governments determining how they should respond to us. So I think this is a big challenge for governments, but it should also be a challenge for the rest of us to push our governments to respond to. And, a lot of people don't like the idea of regulation, but honestly, I think we've got to be willing to figure out how best to organize and regulate. Because what we learned with social media, we learned too late. Why are countries now regulating social media to try to prevent them from influencing our children? Because we have evidence that children have been negatively affected by social media. They have had greater increases, those who use it the most, or those who are most vulnerable to using it, in things like anxiety and depression and suicide and all the rest of it. But they've also lost their attention. I'll just give you a quick example. So in New York, we just passed a law that children could not bring their phones to school. Now, some people say, well, why'd they ever let them bring the phones to school? Because we didn't understand what a detriment to learning it was. So now we are seeing increased attention spans again in classrooms. We're seeing more engagement between students and teachers. We're seeing students actually talk to each other, not walk around with their heads down looking at their screens. So we learned. It was a hard lesson. It took a decade to learn that lesson. So let's not let AI influence us negatively and then learn the lessons, and it may be too late to try to do anything about energy, water, labor markets, unemployment, hallucinations, delusions that AI promotes. Let's figure out how we can deal with that ahead of time and try to shape it rather than be shaped by it.
I think that's some very, very wise words of advice. Secretary Clinton, moving on a slightly different track, I did want to talk to you a little bit about your own personal worldview. I remember after the 2016 election, you chose to go on a hike the very next day with all your friends and family, and you were greeting passers-by. Why did you choose connection in that moment of, quite frankly, must have been disappointment and setback? How has that shaped your experience of resilience?
Well, first of all, part of the reason why I care deeply about climate is because I really care deeply about nature and the environment. And I find it so reinvigorating, and it is something that I've always sought out, taking long walks, hiking, being in beautiful places, getting, you know, the extraordinary energy one gets from being in nature. But now we know, because people study everything, now we know that spending time in nature, literally if it's just in a city park, if it's watching a river or the ocean, if it's hiking in the hills, whatever it might be, actually does help reset your brain. So my feelings about climate change are really rooted in a great love of nature that, you know, my mother really instilled in me. I mean, just lying on the ground looking at a tree, what a miracle it is. And to know that as a human being, we did not do that. We did not create that. We did not create the oceans and the rivers and the mountains and the forests. We inherited it. And with that inheritance, as with any inheritance, should come a sense of responsibility. And so I care deeply about climate because I see the impacts that it's having, just the extraordinary damage it is doing, and what is now expected to be increasing temperatures that will flood islands, cause wildfires, increase the severity of storms, subject our bodies to extreme heat, because we have not cared for our planet. And you know, sometimes when I say things like this, I see, you know, political eyes or business eyes kind of glaze over, like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, if we don't take care of our world today, it will cost us more money. It will cost us more death and destruction. It will cost us more political conflict. That is not good for business, and it's not good for politics. So I come from a very personal perspective as to why I believe we have to keep trying, despite the naysayers, despite the cynics. We have to keep trying with all of our hearts and minds to really respect and cherish this planet that has given us everything. And we have done some really good things with it, but we have caused some great damage. So now we have to try our hardest to make amends.
I couldn't agree with you more. I did want to ask you the final question, and take your time on this. What is your advice for young Global South climate leaders?
Do not give in to the naysayers and the cynics. Do not doubt that you are engaged in historic, important work. Of course, you have to understand the politics. You have to understand the markets and the businesses. That is part of being an effective advocate. You have to know how hard you can push, what compromises you can take to try to go farther and get more done because you have built on it and you're ready to go from there. So I think the voices of young people in the global South have to get much louder and much more insistent. And you also have to come up with creative solutions. And then you have to keep knocking on doors till other people listen to you. You know, I remember when I went to the COP conference in Dubai, I met with a group of young activists from the global South. They had extraordinary ideas, but they couldn't get anybody to listen to them. They didn't bring their bankers with them. They didn't have bankers. They didn't know people on boards of directors of companies, but they were rooted in solving the problems they saw in their communities. So we have to be more open and understanding that ideas are going to come from everywhere, and they're going to be good ideas. Most of the global climate financing doesn't go to people like that. And very, very little of it goes to women who are activists and environmental innovators. So let's open our minds, and if you're a young climate activist, keep knocking on those doors, keep making your arguments, keep showing up, come to conferences like this, and keep working together. And, you know, as I said, the Clinton Global Initiative, we will help you. We will help introduce you to people. We will try to find networks that you can be part of. Come to our meeting in September, because this needs to be everybody working together, not one group, not one country, everybody working together. So that's my plea and really my gratitude, because you've got to pick up this baton that we have dropped, and you have to run to the finish line and take the rest of us with you.
Thank you.
I cannot wait for the political change that I know will come to the United States, because that's a few years off. We have to build.
Start making moves with Hostinger's sale. Claim your .in domain for 36 months and pay only ₹1 for the first 12. Don't miss out. Register your domain name before somebody else does. Turn one day into day one and grow your brand online. Go for it with Hostinger.
Dreaming of an adult-only escape on Booking.com? But remembered your little ones coming too? Free cancellation makes it easy to adjust your plans to fit the whole family. Booking.com, booking.yeah.
Across the world, we're seeing these different attitudes towards AI. In countries like India, where we are, there's enormous optimism and trust. I think closing that confidence gap is as much a policy task as it is a technical one.
I think from 2018 through 2024, really, which is a good 6-year period, we were in the era of pre-training. So we were writing one very large exponential curve towards improving the performance of the models. And that curve was very predictable, and it sort of had clear characteristics where the more resources you put in, the more results you would get out. And there was a lot of questions at the time of, you know, whether or not this curve would continue, and even to the degree it did continue, were there diminishing marginal returns. And I think this was sort of one of the more recent sort of eras of AI skepticism. And then in 2024, like towards the end of 2024, began the era of reinforcement learning. So this was sort of the next major wave that stacked on top of the previous wave. And this is when we saw the models begin to learn to reason. And, you know, there's always this meme of, what did Ilya see? Well, Ilya saw reasoning from the models. And it was very clearly this next mega wave of the technology. And even reinforcement learning had, you know, clearly some limitations, and there were all these questions around when that was going to, you know, how long that era was going to last, and maybe there were limitations in that era. And then at the end of 2025, so just a few months ago, I think we've really begun an entirely new paradigm or era of the technology, which is really beginning the era of recursive self-improvement. And I think we're really starting to see this in the development of our models. I think most of the major labs are seeing this in the development of their models, which is that the models themselves have now become instrumental in accelerating the process of producing the next AIs. And so, the sort of from the outside, what you see is maybe an acceleration of overall development velocity, an acceleration at which the speed at which the new models are being released. Internally, what we see is just dramatic speed ups. I think the sort of the productivity of an individual researcher has grown dramatically, and we don't expect that to stop. In fact, we expect it to kind of smoothly continue accelerating, where the output of an individual researcher and individual engineer, well, I think that itself will continue growing exponentially as the technology improves. And the other mega wave that is somewhat coincident with this new paradigm within the sort of development of the technology of recursive self-improvement is really the arrival of agents in earnest. And this is something that has been talked about since, I honestly want to say 2023, with a lot of fanfare. And for a long time, it was sort of one of these hype buzzwords that never actually lived up to the expectations. And I think also at the end of 2025, toward middle to end of 2025, we started to see agents actually work. And this is, these are where the models can actually start taking actions and start automating entire workflows and being sort of dramatically more productive as actual sort of entities unto themselves versus assisters. And this era is, it started with coding agents. We're starting to see it really percolate through personal agents. This is a big part of what we believe in at Meta. And I think over the course of 2026, we will see large-scale agent deployments in many areas of the economy, many areas of the world, and the sort of, the GDP of AI, so to speak, is going to grow exponentially.
Well, that is very welcome to hear. I think you hit on something that is important, because I remember when I first started doing this in the job, the conversations were all around these scaling laws and would they continue? And you mentioned the skepticism. I mean, not only have they continued and continue to deliver this exponential growth, it feels very much like the last few months have seen an acceleration. And it's what you touched on. It's what Dario and Demis have also said to me and publicly, driven by this recursive self-improvement, that the models themselves are now able to help us develop the new models quicker. So, we're at this quite exciting, but also a moment of some anxiety because of that accelerating development timescale. So I wanted to just then talk about trust, because I give you a story. I have two young girls, and as they're using their chat bots and things, and they're always like, please, so and so and so and so, and thank you when they finish writing their request or they get the answer back. There's lots of pleases and thank yous everywhere. And I thought that was interesting. But I said to them, I said, look, there's you don't need to do that. There's not a person. It doesn't matter. And by the way, it costs a fortune when we have to do the compute for that. And they said to me, you know what, Daddy? They said, if AI takes over the world, we want to have been kind to the AI. And I thought that was good insurance policy. But it kind of it touches on this anxiety.
They're very wise.
Yeah. In that maybe across the world, we're seeing these different attitudes towards AI. In countries like India, where we are, there's enormous optimism and trust. And then actually in Western countries, we're seeing that anxiety is still the kind of dominant feeling towards AI. Now, I think closing that confidence gap is as much a policy task as it is a technical one. But I'd love to just get your thoughts. I mean, obviously you are at a B2C company dealing with billions of consumers every day. How do you think about this trust question? How do we get trust up in places where it is not, for something that you believe, I believe, and everyone in this room probably believes can do untold good?
Yeah, this is one of the most important questions, and actually perhaps even more so than the technology and the development of the technology, maybe will govern how successfully the technology diffuses. more so than anything. And you know, we think deeply about this because our vision for the technology is that it is we can deploy personal agents that know you better than most people know about your health, know about your goals, know about your relationships, know about your family and your friends, and can really help you live your life more effectively, you know, can help you be healthier, can help you accomplish projects that you never would have had time for, can help you build the business you always wanted, can help you explore your interests. And to properly build that requires an immense amount of trust from consumers, from governments, from effectively everyone, from all organizations. And so, you know, this is one of these interesting moments where I think because the sort of the form that of the technology that we wanted to take is so intimate and is so deeply tied with what we think is really the future of, you know, the consumer life, and the consumer, you know, is at the core of their relationship with technology. The figuring out ways to develop the technology in partnership with governing bodies and in partnership with nonprofits and other organizations to garner that trust is very important. This is something we've seen at Meta actually in with WhatsApp. You know, we were talking about this actually backstage, but WhatsApp has become incredibly ubiquitous and a real, I think, utility for much of the world, in large part due to its commitment to privacy and the sort of trust that we've built around WhatsApp as an organization. Oftentimes at the sort of, you know, not necessarily for the optimization of our business objectives, but for the optimization of trust in WhatsApp as a platform. I think a similar journey will be necessary for the AI products of the modern age. And we've seen, I mean, we've already seen various kerfuffles or sort of jabs back and forth between the existing AI, you know, products and labs around, you know, whether their actions are truly garnering, you know, truly building this these levels of trust. But and then I think the, you know, the topic that you really kicked off at Bletchley around in a sort of like global way around safety, I think is more important than ever. I think we're already seeing that the models are achieving levels of capability which cause some pause around some of the sort of like risks that we monitor for these models as it comes to various national security risks or various cyber security risks. And so the importance of properly testing and then building the right systems to monitor and deploy these models safely is of paramount importance.
And you and I have been talking about this same topic for some years, and that was key to us at Bletchley, was establishing the AI Security Institute in the UK to do exactly that work. And the thought was there was a gap where the technical capability didn't exist amongst governments to evaluate some of these risks. So how could we in the UK hopefully take a lead, but in a sense provide a global public good, where we work in partnership with companies like yours and the other frontier labs to do pre-deployment testing on these models. And my thought was always that by doing that, and that's not regulation, but it gives citizens confidence that the technology is safe, because ultimately people don't adopt a technology that they don't trust. And my sense hearing you is that there's a role for the companies. I thought the privacy example with WhatsApp is a good one, is how do they design AI products that will engender trust. And then there's a role, it sounds like you agree, for governments to do some of that technical evaluation. And is your sense that we need, you know, more cooperation between governments on that, more interaction with the labs? Is that working as well as it should at the moment?
I think the interaction is working well, but I think this is one area where, you know, we always can be more thoughtful, and especially as we enter this phase of dramatically increased AI progress, I think, you know, we constantly need to be thinking about how we can do better.
I think one of the other areas where, you know, this debate on trust will be won or lost is in the public sector. I think as citizens, if you experience better healthcare, more efficient government services, a state that is quicker at dealing with you, I think this debate goes from abstract to you have a real way to demonstrate benefit. Do you have a sense from where you sit about where the most obvious use cases or deployment cases are in the public sector for AI that we should be excited about and that governments should be thinking about?
I do. I think that one of the first, if you think of governments as
Young developers can't clearly differentiate between artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science. In the early stages of my career, it was a bit confusing for me.
A sense from where you sit about where the most obvious use cases or deployment cases are in the public sector for AI that we should